Good Tuesday morning, everyone. This is Ann White, the founder of the Creating Calm Network and also the host of The Chicken Show. And I am coming to you from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where it is sub-zero temperatures today. And I'm interviewing our guest, Terez Kinnick, who is from Wisconsin as well. She's from, and she'll let us know, Merrill, it's more in the center of the state. We're going to be talking about laws pertaining to chickens and the organic movement, all sorts of wonderful things. And what I find interesting, one of the things we're going to be talking about is wintering hens. And an odd thing for me is my hens had a coop, and the coop was in the garage, and I just couldn't sleep because I kept thinking they were going to get a frostbite or something. So I have moved all my hens into the basement during this sub-zero weather, and they'll be going back out as soon as the temperatures go back up. And Terez may tell me I overreacted, and that's perfectly fine because I'm absolutely new to chickens. And you'll see I've got Riley here with me. He is a fan of the chickens, but I don't want him to bark during the show. So anyway, let me open it up to Terez Kinnick. Terez, I'm so glad you're here with us today.
I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things I noticed when Terez and I were doing the sound check is there's a little bit of a delay in my question and her answer. And so we're not coming to you from around the world. This is just what's going on in Wisconsin. So, but bear with us. So Terez, tell us about your hens. What is your life like with chickens?
Well, I have 10 barnyard mixed chickens, and I have 1 sassy duck. And they pretty much keep me busy. They're just great to have around. They have great personalities. They're friendly. And they're my hobby and my passion.
And part of this then inspired you to start your own fan page on Facebook. And that's where I found Terez. So you are the one who runs Wisconsin Chickens. And yeah. What is your fan page like? Is everybody from Wisconsin, or do you have other people in other states who are just interested in what you're doing?
Actually, I have quite a few fans from Wisconsin, but I do have a global fan base. Mm-hmm. People from Canada, Britain, Australia, Ireland, Turkey. There's some from China, so a little, all over the world, really.
And when you started your hens in Merrill, Wisconsin, were there any laws that you had to be concerned with, or were you okay because you were in an agricultural part of the state?
Well, in some cases, there is an acreage requirement, even in the agricultural zones. Sometimes you have to have 3 acres. Sometimes you have to have 10 acres. In the Merrill area, you have to have at least 3 acres. Wow. So you always have to keep in mind. You always have to keep in mind what the ordinances are where you're living, whether it's urban or rural.
And how did you get involved in the legislation, the laws that are necessary to have urban chickens? Because that's where I first found Terez, is when I said, yes, I'll take these chickens in Sheboygan. I wasn't even sure if I was legal, so I hid them for a little while, and then I found out that in Sheboygan you can have chickens as long as they're not a nuisance. So that's where I first put Terez on my radar. But how did you get involved, and what have you learned about this legislation, Terez?
Well, I was actually contacted by people from the Maryland area through my fan page, is how I got into this movement of helping people legalize chickens in an area. They had contacted me asking questions, asking if I had any research or if what my knowledge was about it, because they were currently working on an ordinance, and it takes a lot of work. There's a lot that goes into the proposals, working with the town councils. A lot of people are on the fence about chicken keeping. There's a lot of stereotypes. It just really depends on who your town council members are and where and how the urban city dwellers feel about it.
Right. What is it, how prevalent is owning chickens, at least in Wisconsin? Is it getting more and more common?
Yes, it is. The movement is growing, but there's also a lot of people who decide to go rogue and go underground to keep chickens, and then lo and behold, their neighbor reports them because their chickens are becoming a nuisance, and then they have the city, on their doorsteps saying it's not legal for them to have chickens, and that's really what sparks this entire movement. People don't tend to check out whether it's legal or not first. They tend to go rogue and then discover it's illegal, and then they fight to get the ordinance.
Right. How long does it take to get an ordinance passed to allow chickens in a community, or is it just too variable to give an answer?
I've seen it take up to as much as 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there is a lot of research that goes into these proposals, and a lot of times it really depends on your city and what their feelings are regarding chickens. They tend to feel more so that chickens are a nuisance, and they worry about the smell and things like that. And sometimes it can only take a few months. It really depends.
And I guess roosters are a variable in the ordinances, whether or not
Yes.
you can have a rooster, or are they banned in most of them?
In most cases, roosters are not permitted because they are deemed a nuisance. There's noise ordinances regarding roosters, and they just don't permit them. In most cases, the sole purpose of chicken keeping in an urban area is for eggs, and they just don't deem that a rooster is needed.
How many roosters do you have?
I have 4 right now. Too many. I have an overload.
Yeah, they're beautiful though. They are beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, roosters are.
Are there any cities in Wisconsin that you're aware of that are battling this legislation, trying to avoid having chickens?
There are quite a few that are on the fence about it.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Richfield, Wisconsin was one of them at one time. I'm not exactly sure where they are with it at this point. There are some that have passed the ordinance and then now have decided decided to pass another ordinance saying it's not legal. It just really depends on how people are following the regulations, and they're maintaining their flock, keeping their coops clean. How their neighbors are complaining. Sometimes chickens aren't allowed to even free range, and they're just not following the rules, and sometimes that just kind of overturns the ordinance
Right,
when people start.
yeah, I think that's a good question, because one of the things I see is that you can have chickens as long as they're not a nuisance, but they don't really explain what a nuisance would be, so I think that's very subjective. And so one of the things I would be asking you is what people can do to avoid having their hens become a nuisance. One of the first things I did was I hadn't realized that when I put the chicken coop in, we did the outside coop, which then faces my neighbor's yard. So I don't even get to see the hens if they're in their coop, but he does. So I quickly started bringing over eggs. And it turns out now he's a fan of the eggs. And when I said the chickens were going to go in the spring, oh no, I love the chickens, I love the eggs. So I think part of it was cultivating a relationship with the closest neighbor. So that was one thing. But Terez, what are other things people can do to avoid the complaint of nuisance?
Well, actually, getting all your neighbors on board is a really good idea. Telling them that you have chickens. In fact, some of the ordinances that they're passing today mandate that all of your neighbors be notified. It's not a mandate in every city, but it's actually a good idea. Maybe sharing your eggs, getting them on board with the idea. the taste is significantly better than what they're going to buy in a grocery store.
Yeah.
And they're going to notice the difference right away. Knowing your regulation, knowing whether, the enclosure rules apply, knowing, coop distance, property lines, you have to there's a lot of regulations where you have to have your coop placed 25 feet, from your neighbor's property line.
And I guess making sure that your chickens don't smell. I was very good with keeping my coop. I think fairly good keeping my coop clean, but I had started a compost pile not knowing anything about compost. And one day I went out and I thought, what is the smell in the neighborhood? Then I realized it was my compost pile, so I Googled compost, and now I fixed my compost pile. But I felt bad for my whole neighborhood because I was messed up my compost pile. So I think part of it is keeping the smell down in your area.
Yes, coop maintenance is a really big thing. Disposal of your waste. Looking into composting before you even consider,
good point.
composting or composting your chicken waste is a good idea. Doing your research. Just don't go put it out on a pile and start watering it down and
yep.
Without doing your research, especially if you're living right on top of your neighbors. You kind of have to be considerate that way.
Yeah, that was the lesson I learned, but thank goodness for Google, because now I have a beautiful compost pile. And since my yard is very small, because I purchased a small yard for maintenance before I got addicted to chickens, I'm now giving away bags of compost to my friends and fellow urban gardeners. So that could be another thing you do if you don't have a place for your waste, is see if anybody has an urban garden that they would like some beautiful compost for.
Absolutely. And then another thing people don't consider is the regulations also state how many birds you're allowed to have. So don't go over the number that is allowed. In most cases it's 3 to 4, and some permits 6. And make sure you check and see if whether there's a permit required or not. Some cities require permits and some cities don't.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah, very, very good. Thank you. One of the things, like for me, most of my hens are going to be going back to their farm in the spring, so I'm thinking about getting some new chicks. And I would like to ask your advice and opinion. What's the best way to bring new chickens in to get healthy baby chicks? What suggestions do you have for people with getting baby chickens?
Well, chicks are ideally ordered in the springtime and in the summertime. And in most cases, you want to really look into trying to find a reputable hatchery, or sometimes you can purchase them at animal swaps. You want to consider the kind of breed that you want to raise, and sometimes with it being Wisconsin, the cold hardy breeds are really the best to go with. Your Rhode Island Reds, your Barred Rocks, your Buff Orpingtons, your Astrolabs, Wyandottes, Cuckoo Morans are really good. Some breeds that aren't as good with the cold are your Silkies, and a lot of people are really getting into the Bantams more so than the standards. I mean, especially in the city, the bantam-sized chicks and chickens are really popular. So when you're getting Silkies and Frizzles, they're very cute, but they're not necessarily a very hardy, winter hardy breed. And in most cases, you end up bringing them indoors in the wintertime because they just don't do well in the cold at all. And in addition, you want to make sure that you know how to care for chicks. You want to make sure you're giving them starter feed, day one when you bring them home up until they're 8 weeks old. You want to make sure they have water at all times, and cool water, so don't place your water right under the heat lamp. Another thing that happens with chicks is they tend to drown. It's another high risk. So when you get those quarter-sized waters in the water base, it's a good idea to put rocks in the water base, because then it keeps your chicks from drowning. But then when you also bring your chicks home, you want to make sure that you're dipping their beak into the water to get them introduced to where their water is, and just get them hydrated right away when you get them home. It's really important to keep them hydrated.
What do you think
In
about vaccinations for chicks? Getting them vaccinated as chickens.
the Merrick's disease,
Uh-huh.
that's really a big thing right now. And most of your commercial hatcheries already vaccinate for Merrick's, so that's something you can ask about if they're vaccinated for Merrick's. It's a really good idea that they are vaccinated. You know, sometimes when you buy privately, a lot of your private sellers don't tend to vaccinate for Merrick's, so it's really a good thing to ask. Or you can actually, you know, vaccinate them yourself. You can look into getting them vaccinated and do it yourself, if that's what you want to do.
When you say that you have a barnyard mix, what kind of hens and roosters do you have?
They're crosses, so they're crosses of Americanas and Easter eggers, and pretty much Americanas and Easter eggers.
And you're thinking of going into another kind of breeding to more of the exotics, were you saying?
Yeah, I want to get into raising more of like the lavender Orpingtons, and more of the breeds that give you a wide variety, you know, different egg colors. Cuckoo Morans, I love the really dark brown eggs. I've really fallen in love with the golden lace Wyandottes. Just really, you know, the breeds that are richer in colors, that give you a, you know, different variety of colored eggs. It's really my thing.
That'll be fun. That'll be fun to see as you bring those. Are you going to be bringing them in as little baby chicks or eggs, or how are you going to add those to your flock?
I'm thinking I'm going to start with chicks. I tend to like to raise them up myself. You know, they get used to you, and it's just more fun to raise them yourself. But, you know, you can buy your breed stock. You just have to be careful in making sure you get good bloodlines when you're getting into breeding. It's really important, especially if you get people that want to get more into showing chickens. So,
and one of the
absolutely.
comments I have to myself is I was thinking when I this spring of getting some babies and raising them myself, and I almost thought about eggs. How cute it would be just to get eggs. But then I don't think you can sex them until they're born. And when you are an urban chicken owner, what if you wound up with roosters? Then they would be so cute,
Exactly.
fill your heart, and then you've got this rooster problem. So I think, note to self, get a sexed pullet.
Yeah, sometimes the sexed link options don't always pan out. I know, you know, there's always that 50-50 chance, so sometimes people still get roosters no matter what. So your best bet is, if you live in this city, have a go-to. You know, find a farm or a place that is willing to adopt them and find homes, or try to find a home for them. There's a lot of online Facebook groups where you can go on and, you know, say you have just an overload of roosters, and, you know, there's breeders out there who are interested in giving them good homes. You know, there's also people that in the city who don't even know what it's like to have a rooster altogether. So, you know, it's interesting.
I got scared once because I was outside my coop and I heard crowing. And I go in and I'm looking at my hen, and she's doing kind of a pretty good crow. But then I looked up and did some research and found out that even if you don't have a rooster, she's laying eggs, I know she's a hen, that sometimes a hen will try to imitate a crow. So I felt much better, but I wanted to say, shh, the neighbor's going to think you're a rooster if you keep that up. We were going to talk about winterizing, or keeping your hens safe in the winter. And as I said, I wimped out, brought all 6 of mine down in the basement. And that was probably unnecessary. But Terez is an expert on cold winters, living in Wisconsin. So, Terez, what are some of your thoughts on protecting hens in the winter?
Well, having the adequate coop for starters for wintering is really important. Some of the smaller scale commercial coops really aren't built for that. So you really want to do your research and make sure that you're, you know, having a proper shelter for them for wintering. You know, a lot of people think they have to have insulated coops, and really you want to make sure you have a draft-free coop It's highly important that you keep your chickens from drafts. Ventilation is also important. Keeping the humidity low in your coop. Moisture just increases the probability of frostbite and respiratory illness, and can be detrimental to your birds. So you want to make sure that you're swapping out your bedding at least once a week, the first 1 to 2 inches. I guess it just really depends on the type of bedding that you're using. Some people do the deep litter method. I tend to be more of a fan of sand because, first off, sand tends to hold heat. It's low. It doesn't really. It's drier. It doesn't harbor a lot of moisture. However, some people tend to think that sand isn't really good in the respect that it contains a lot of bacteria. I mean, and then what do you get? How do you get rid of it? You know, what do you do with it? So sand doesn't work for everybody, but I tend to like sand a lot.
That's what I was going to ask you about your bedding, because sand seemed like a good way to clean the litter, like almost using a kitty litter scoop, as opposed to having this hay and everything to take out all the time. So, so there are pluses and minuses to sand, I guess.
Yeah, I tend to be a fan of it, but you know, there's always the pros and cons. A little controversy there, but you know, a lot of people go with the pine shavings. I would definitely not recommend not doing the cedar shavings. They tend to be more toxic for the birds. You know, you can go straw, but you know, just keep it maintained.
I think the thing that scared me, and because my coop looks like it was fine, you know, built, and it was inside my garage, but the window to the garage had the moisture that was frozen, and I thought, okay, that must mean there's some humidity there, and I was afraid of frostbite. So I think that's where my fear finally came, and said, you're all moving down in the basement until the wind chill comes back up. So I don't know where the water kind of icicles on the window, but I thought, maybe that's humidity. So.
Well, you know, your larger breeds like leghorns, for example, that have the larger combs and wattles, are more prone to get frostbitten than your breeds with the smaller combs. So it's another thing to consider when selecting the breeds you want to raise. You know, a lot of people because of Wisconsin, tend to go with the smaller combed breeds than with the larger combed breeds. You know, so if you're not really worried about egg production, you know, really, you know, you can tend to go with some of the smaller combed breeds too. So there's a lot of variables to consider.
What an interesting hobby or lifestyle, that's for sure. And as the accidental chicken person, I'm just loving all of the different talents and the different people like yourself who are sharing their knowledge and wisdom. Probably most people, do they do their research before they get their hens? Because I was going to ask you what you would tell someone who said, you know, I think I'd like to start with chickens. What would you say if all of a sudden someone said that to you?
You know, the thing that I tend to see, especially with running animal markets, is a lot of people, some people do research and some people don't, and a lot of people tend to just, oh, the chicks are cute and they're going to be good pets, you know, because their kids really want them at the time. They don't really think about the care that goes into them and that they're going to grow up.
And
you know, and yeah, and they're messy, and they, you know, there's a lot of care. So a lot of them just buy them out of the cuteness factor, and you know, and then before you know it, they're in an animal shelter, or sometimes even worse. You know, you find them running across, you know, alongside a highway. But you know, it's really a good idea for people to do their research if they're going to get chicks or start raising chickens before they do it. I know if you're in a position where somebody just can't have them anymore and they need a good home, you know, just, you know, try to do your best. And when you get home, do some quick research. Get your basics.
I'm a researcher by need. I think, uh-oh, compost smells. I better do some research. But yeah, I think that, you know, one of the other things, too, you have a duck. And I think that's so cool. And I think you posted a photo of a Campbell duck, and I thought, oh, I love that duck. I didn't do my research yet, so I'm going to ask you, how does your duck fit into the family? And tell us about your duck.
Well, the duck was raised with chickens, so it pretty much acts like a chicken.
Uh-huh.
And it does very well with chickens, not more so with other ducks. It's just from day one. It's just preferred to be.
How did you get this done?
I actually, it was bought at my animal market.
Uh-huh.
I have an animal market in Neillsville, Wisconsin that I do twice a year in the spring and in the fall. And it was just sitting with 2 chickens, you know, and I had to have it.
So tell me about your duck.
Tell me about the duck.
Yeah, what's he like?
He just loves to play in water and loves to be with the chickens, and I can't really let it out because it'll fly away because it's a mallard. So
Okay.
A lot of times it can get loose on me and try to fly away, but it's just a really lovely duck.
I think that's neat. And what's his name?
I call him Sassy. That's what I call it.
Your sassy duck. Well, it's been so nice talking to you, and I'm happy that you have your group called Wisconsin Chickens. I know that's a lot of work to support a group like that, but it sounds like, and you say your group, we talked a little bit before we went on the air, but your group is it's global as well, so people are interested in what you're doing in Wisconsin, but also sharing their opinions or their experiences all around the world.
Yes. I've gotten to know some really neat people, you know, all over the place. So I like to talk about things that you don't hear on a daily basis. And you know, the internet is a world of a wealth of information as far as raising chickens, and you're always learning. You're not going to know everything, and you know, you're never going to be an expert because there's always something to learn. And it's amazing how people just want to learn about chickens and want to have chickens, and they're deeming them more pets more and more than how they used to treat them in the past. They used to be considered just an egg factory, and it's just an amazing movement.
Let me ask you a question. Do you eat chicken?
Oh, sure, but I don't eat my own. I don't even like butchering them, so, and I don't, so.
Yeah, I was just wondering that. Yeah, because I'm a vegetarian, so I don't have to do that. But I thought, wow, how do people do that once they get to meet their personalities? So, yeah, just curious.
No, I don't like to eat pets, and my chickens are pets.
Yeah.
So I just really have a no rule.
No eating pets. Okay. But let's give a shout out to Wisconsin Chickens, and for anybody who doesn't live in Wisconsin, just know it's a wealth of information wherever you live and for sharing. And I'm just so glad I had a chance to meet Terez, and thank you, Terez, for taking time in your day to be on the Chicken Show. I really appreciate that.
It was great being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and keep an eye on Wisconsin Chickens. All right, everybody go out and have a clucking good week. Enjoy your hens and do your research ahead of time. Don't be like the accidental chicken person that I was. And we will see you next week with a brand new show. So take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we're off the air, and the link that we have you on right now, chickenshow.creatingcom.